Hello everyone, Minus here, and we're on to our 5th class update as we dig into the class changes for Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, which were recently unveiled in their newest website update on August 30th, 2020. In this video, we are going to tackle the men and women of the forest, the Ranger. So let's start at the top here and talk about their defined role of damage. Again, as we've seen across every class, it has been reduced to a much easier to understand form of their class role. Previously, they were listed as melee and range DPS and utility. Now, first of all, how momentum works and how it accumulates and what impact it has is actually no longer present in the description of the Ranger. And we could see that possibly being the case because momentum has changed quite a bit from its original iteration. That said, it remains a combat resource, and now they've also added endurance, which we're seeing across the entirety of classes for the most part. Now, available armor goes from cloth, leather, and light mail to what they're calling light chain. And as we've stated before, in case you haven't seen our other videos, we do believe that everything underneath the listed light chain, for example, would be used, such as cloth and leather. It appears they have also increased the types of weapons in which Rangers can use. Previously, weapons were listed as bows, crossbows, and most one-handed weapons. Now they list them as dagger, short spear, sword, great sword, edged, great blade, axe, club, warhammer, mace, longbow, short bow, and crossbow. So that's it for the top there, and other than the couple slight changes, a lot of that stays the same for the Ranger. So let's jump into their new or changed abilities. First is Silent Arrow. A slight change has occurred to this spell, where it no longer lists that it must be used out of combat, or the fact that it deals bonus damage outdoors. Now, if you decide to manually aim, you can increase the damage of this spell. Engage is new, and this is leaping into the fray to engage an enemy in melee combat, granting initiative. Your next melee ability will critically hit. Now, this also appears to pair with an existing ability called Withdraw, which has changed to also include gaining advantage, leaping out of combat, and makes your next ranged ability crit. Forage is no longer listed as an ability, and we'll talk about that later, but one of the components that could be generated from Forage was Brightfire Sap, which is now its own ability, and it used to be called Weapon Coating Brightfire Sap, but now it's just called Brightfire Sap. Kalen's Command was renamed to Kalen's Charge and does the same thing. Fractal Arrow, which apparently replaces Glass Arrow and changes slightly. Now, in the past, it would explode and deal damage to an area of enemies and could cause bleeding. Now it seems to be a single target ability, which seems to just cause bleeding on impact. This one also feels like an ability that could benefit from Mastery adding the AoE bleed damage. However, at the same time, it would be interesting because one may want to keep it strictly to single target to avoid breaking CC. It'll be kind of interesting to see how things like this play out, which turn an ability from single target to AoE, if that in fact happens in the Mastery system. Now, Beckon Thunderpaw was renamed Beckon Grizzly. They removed the effect of making them more vulnerable to physical damage and changed it from knockdown to stunning them. Beckon Veilhawks has had a very slight change in which it states it can now not be used out of combat. Now, this is an interesting one because we're guessing a bit. Hidden Snare may have been renamed Hamstring Trap, and if this is the case, it has been significantly changed. It is no longer a root and dot effect, and it now only reduces movement speed. Now again, just a guess, it could be a separate ability, but with this cleanup, I wonder if the extra pieces of the original spell will be added in as a Mastery style upgrade. Weighted Bolt now puts an enemy into an off-balance state, the first state creation we've seen with Rangers on an enemy. The next new ability is Ferocious Assault. Now, this spell did exist before, but the spell casting interrupt feature was removed. Previously, at a base of 50% chance, you could actually scale up the ability to interrupt with your agility and dexterity. This sounds like a great Mastery addition as well to the base ability, and I'd almost expect that to be the case. Of course, remember, it's only a guess. That will cover new abilities or changes to abilities that we've seen so far. So let's talk about what's missing from the website that was previously on the old website. Now again, I will always preface this with the fact that this does not mean these spells are going away forever, but it could mean that they are under significant change or possibly being reworked. Now the first one is an important one, and it's tracking. Now this allowed you to find specific targets in a large area by tracking their location. This is a very important ranger spell, and I would be shocked if this wasn't implemented in some cool fashion. And I know two things would happen if it wasn't. Number one, Theric would be really mad. And number two, we would never know that because he'd be lost forever in the woods, never able to find his way back to town. We need tracking, and if I put my money on it, I'd expect it to be a part of Pantheon. Lay of the Land Ferret Scout allowed you to look ahead with a small ferret that is no longer listed, as well as Lay of the Land Hawk Scout, which was outside only and allowed you to look further ahead with the ability to fly with the hawk. Ladwin's Whisper reduced the aggro radius of a target animal, and Beckon Veil Striders would basically summon Veil Striders to run beside you and increase your movement speed. Now another ability that was removed and seemed to have much more play into the Ranger fantasy was Forage. This ability was sort of a set of abilities. Using Forage allowed you to get ingredients from around you and use them to create different weapon coatings, tonics, and balms. It was noted above that Brightfire Sap was changed in name and set as its own ability. It'll be interesting to see if it becomes a standalone ability fully, or if it's just a renaming structure for the reintroduction of the Forage ability set. The other abilities in Forage that were previously shown were an arrow coating that applied effects on your target, a tonic that granted you momentum regeneration, and a balm which increased your natural HP regen. Again, it'll be interesting to see if this system sticks around, as it's a very high fantasy class style ability. Beckon Pantheras was a short duration, high damage attack ability which called in Pantheras to make enemies more vulnerable to physical attacks and deal damage. Warning Shot was an ability which actually I was a big fan of. It fired an arrow into the ground and it would attune to your offensive target. If that target walked within 10 meters of that arrow, it would fire off a warning sound and relay a message that the target was approaching. This is a really cool ability, as I said before, but honestly, I'd like to see it be a general area thing than a specific target, because it could be really great for firing around a wall where maybe a patrol has a potential to walk by, and it could really help the group scout in a much better way than tying it to an offensive target. We'll see if this makes a comeback in the future. A couple more left were Harpoon Shot, which would fire an arrow with a rope attached, allowing you to pull your enemy towards you, also known as "Get over here!" And finally, Aim to Kill, which fired 3 arrows at your enemy with a chance to fire up to 2 additional arrows based on your agility and dexterity, sort of a rapid fire arrow shot. So of all the classes we've looked at so far, we've seen a lot of changes from the previous class descriptions from the old site until now for the Ranger, and it honestly makes a lot of sense. If you've followed their development, at one time it was very heavily based on an in and out style of combat. More modernly, the class has been more balanced to be able to stick to either ranged or melee, without needing to go in and out and rotate range and in-close abilities. Momentum still exists as their key resource, and now we see things like advantage and initiative being mentioned. So there's a lot more to learn about this Ranger class for sure. Overall, I think the Ranger is very well represented on the site, and while a couple of cool abilities are missing, with the exception of tracking, none of them are game-changing. That said, I'm sure that we'll see some of these features revealed in the future or possibly evolved into their former selves. So what do you think, Rangers? Will you and your kind finally shed the controversial history of the EQ Ranger, who is nothing more than a ground tank? Let us know in the comments how you feel about the current representation of Rangers on the new site. And also, please make sure to check back as we continue our quest to complete these short videos for all of the classes of Pantheon Rise of the Fallen over the next week or so. Have a suggestion? We're always ready to listen. Just leave some comments below. And until next time.